All right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Hawk Podcasts. I'm Hawk. I'm your host. I'm very happy and honored this evening to have our interview guest, former NFL player named Chris Kluwe, with more than a decade's worth of social justice and LGBTQ activism. Welcome, Chris, and thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate the time.
You're very welcome. So, how was your week? Anything eventful happen?
Well, let's just say my Path of Exile starting strat got extremely fucked.
So, to give some folks some background, you had a bit of a viral moment this week that involved you getting arrested.
Yes, it did. I protested a plaque that our local city council in Huntington Beach wanted to put on the library. And I know that the city council doesn't listen to the members of the community because they don't care about the community. And I figured I needed to do something more to make them aware that this is not okay. And this isn't my first time speaking in front of this city council. So I was very aware that they weren't going to listen to anything I had to say or anything anyone else had to say.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll talk about Huntington Beach itself in a couple of minutes. But so this plaque that they were trying to put up, from what I read, it was, well, first of all, it was black and yellow.
Yes, it was Proud colors, and it was ugly as hell.
And while it wasn't like wasn't explicitly a MAGA plaque, it had the words magical, alluring, galvanizing, adventurous.
Yeah. So I would say that the first iteration of the plaque was explicitly a MAGA plaque because the largest font on the plaque was the MAGA acrostic.
There you go. So let's back up just a little bit. One thing that I wanted to ask you, I've got a lot of friends in the Los Angeles area, and I have heard frequently from them, and I've seen news coverage of Huntington Beach and like MAGA truck parades and things like that, and MAGA flag rallies. You've lived there for quite a while, correct?
Yeah. So, and I also grew up in this area. I grew up in Seal Beach, which is like right up the road from Huntington Beach. And what a lot of people don't know is that Huntington Beach for a very long time has had a serious problem with a skinhead and neo-Nazi population. And it's been an issue since going back to like the 60s and 70s. Okay.
And it's just, I moved out here like 25 years ago from Ohio. I grew up in rural Ohio. And it's like when you think of Southern California, you don't think of those things when you're out in the rest of the country. What are your thoughts as far as like, why were these elements drawn to this area of Southern California?
Yeah, so a lot of them originally came from kind of like Anaheim, a little further north in like Glendale. And the thing is once Disney took over Anaheim and like really started gentrifying the area, they started pushing them out because like who wants Nazis next to Disneyland? Like that's just not going to work.
Yeah,
the mouse would not be pleased, and so they ended up kind of keeping going south, and they ended up in Huntington Beach, and it's a shame because Huntington Beach is it's a really nice town, and there's a lot of really good people that live here. It's just we have this element that they're not good people and they don't care about their community. And it's really frustrating because as a community, we depend on tourism. Like that's one of our main industries in Huntington Beach is getting people to come to the city and see the sights of Huntington Beach. And when you have a bunch of Nazis, it's really hard to get people to come to your city.
Yeah. Well, and in my experience, when you have a city or a town with that kind of an element, even if it's a small element, you can tell me if this is true for Huntington Beach, they also tend to be very loud and very motivated and just kind of drown everybody out.
Yeah. And that's what's happening is that we have this very vocal minority of MAGA supporters in Huntington Beach. And To be fair, Huntington Beach does lean conservative. There are also a lot of conservative voters here. People who would consider themselves conservative. But those people consider themselves like a small C conservative, right? Like they don't want to pay as much taxes. They don't want as many houses built in their backyard. But at the end of the day, like in their hearts, they don't believe that they're Nazis, and they really aren't. But the problem is when you follow a Nazi agenda or you allow Nazis to do what Nazis do, you become a Nazi collaborator, and that makes you a Nazi. So we have to reach those people and make them understand that this MAGA agenda does not have their best interests in mind. It's not a conservative agenda, and it is explicitly a Nazi agenda. So please stop supporting it just because there's an R next to a candidate's name.
It's like I don't even like using the words Republican or conservative to describe these people anymore because I don't think those labels work anymore.
No, I mean they don't, and that's another thing that I really want people to understand is that this is no longer like a left versus right fight. Like this, that's no longer what this is. This is a fight between, are we Americans or are we a country that bends the knee to a king? Because those two things cannot coexist in the same place.
Just some of the things that we've seen in the last week. I mean, we switched sides in the war between Russia and Ukraine. And Trump and Marco Rubio as Secretary of State and J.D. Vance speaking at the Munich Security Conference in Germany last weekend. It's like we're scolding our allies. We're cozying up to Putin. It was just been this huge about face just in the last 10 days.
Right. And it's not even that we switched sides. It's that Trump blamed Ukraine for getting invaded. Like, what the hell, man? They didn't do anything. Putin came in and started attacking them.
One of the things that I wanted to mention. So you were kind enough to put, I think it was a Google document of your remarks that you made at the city council meeting in Huntington Beach up on Blue Sky, and when I downloaded it. I've been a practicing trial attorney for 26 years, and one of the things that I very, very much appreciated about your document is each time you made a statement, you followed it up with a citation, saying, "I'm saying this, and here's what that statement is based on." So providing source material. So anybody who is watching this, please follow Chris on Blue Sky, and there are a bunch of resources on his page, including this Google document that I'm talking about. One of the things that stood out to me in your speech is that you made a couple of introductory remarks, and then you went through this list of MAGA stands for X, Y, and Z. And the first thing on that list was MAGA stands for trying to erase trans people from existence. Why did you think it was important to lead with that?
And I was very deliberate about leading with MAGA stands for erasing trans people, because that is how the Nazis began, and that is what MAGA is doing right now. Like it's no coincidence that these two things are the same, because that's how it always starts. You find a vulnerable population, you work to oppress them, and you see how many people go along with it. And if people go along with it, then you take the next step. And with each next step you take, it becomes harder and harder to stop the machine from grinding people up. So yeah, that was very much like, I'm making an explicit connection between MAGA and Nazis because they're doing the same thing.
Yeah. And I remember during the campaign, I think it was probably in September of last year, my brother was over, we were watching some college football, and that was the first time that I saw Trump's anti-trans commercial. And I remember seeing that, and first I was like, why am I seeing this in California? And then I realized that it was being broadcast nationwide.
Right.
And second, I remember as I was watching that ad, I was thinking about the people that I grew up with in Ohio, and was like, oh, this ad's going to work. and it scared me. And I was like, this is bad.
Yeah, no, and it's real bad because trans people aren't attacking other people. They're just trying to live their lives. Like they're human beings, just like the rest of us. And they want to be free to be who they are. And like MAGA is built on saying, no, you can't be who you are. And not only that, we are going to pretend you don't even exist. And that's the first step down the path to genocide, is saying that someone does not exist. They are not worthy of being considered a human being.
Well, and I think another important factor in that is that I don't remember the exact statistic, but it's something like trans people make up 0.5% of the population. So
Yeah.
not a lot of representation there, and very easy to target and demonize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and again, that's why it's similar to the Nazis, because like that's what they did, and you notice they're trying to use the trans issue to drive a wedge between trans people and the rest of the LGBTQ movement, right? Because that's how it works. Because first they come for the trans people, then they're going to come for the lesbian and gay people, then they're going to come for the liberals, and then they're going to come for you, and there's going to be no one else left to speak for you.
Along those lines, I mean, I talk about politics and the law and the news on my social media and on this podcast. And, people have been using this term constitutional crisis. And I've been describing it as a constitutional collapse because the legislative branch has just completely laid down for the executive branch and just pledged its entire loyalty and given away their independence and given away their constitutional power from Article 1. And it's, within the context of the speech that you gave and the comments that you made to City Council, what are your thoughts on Trump's cabinet nominations and how fast things have been going and where you think things are going to head in the next few months?
Well, yeah, I think you're absolutely right in that it is a complete abdication of Congress's ability to, effectively rein in the executive branch, because that is why we have a system of checks and balances, because our founders lived under a king and said, no more, we are not going to do that anymore. And so that's why we have our three branches of government. And it is especially cowardly of Republican lawmakers to not be standing up to this, because you did not swear an oath to the president. You swore an oath to the Constitution. And the Constitution says you have the power of the purse in order to make sure that the president cannot become a king or a dictator. So you need to use that to bring him back in line. Otherwise, we're no longer a functioning American system.
All right. So some of first of all, I saw the video of you giving the speech and then committing your act of civil disobedience and getting immediately arrested has gone pretty viral this week. But when I printed out your remarks and read through them, I was reminded that you're also a writer, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Because I was like, I'm reading through this and I was like, this is good writing. I do a lot of writing for my job, and bad writing irritates me. And I was like, this is good writing. I like this.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's I love to read. Like I've been a reader ever since I was a kid, and yeah, it's like that. So if you want to quick tip to the audience, if you want to be a good writer, read a lot of books.
Yes. But one thing that struck me is the bulk of it is a series of just very concise, very powerful statements. Like MAGA stands for resegregation and racism. MAGA stands for censorship and book bans. MAGA stands for the firing of people overseeing our nuclear arsenal and things along those lines. MAGA stands for cutting education, including for disabled children. And it's... and then, your description of Elon Musk and Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Pete Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard, I thought were particularly colorful and effective. I enjoyed those very much.
I wish I'd had time to say them. because I enjoyed writing them.
Yeah, I'm glad I got to read them. Well, first, I was reading through this and I saw MAGA stands for censorship and book bans. You've spoken before the same city council over the years about that very topic, right?
Yeah. So this is actually how this library stuff first happened. Is one of our council members, Gracie Vandermark. She's got a real hate on for the library, and so she proposed a book ban in a city council meeting, which she was insisting, oh, it's not a ban, but it would have removed a bunch of books from the children's section and put them in like a special adults only section. And coincidentally, all these books happen to deal with LGBTQ plus issues, and the just immediate uproar from the community. It's like, no, this is a book ban. You can't do that. And so the community started to get together, and a group was formed called Protect HB. And so they started sending out emails, get total grassroots movement, right? Like this, there was no like big name or big money behind this. It was just members of the community who were pissed off that this was happening. It's like, hey, we need to get together and stop this. And so people started like saying, no, you can't do that. So then their next step was like, okay, well, we're not going to remove these specific books, but we're going to create a panel of, I think it's like either 21 or 23 people who will be in charge of reviewing the subject matter of all the books in the library. And ones considered inappropriate will go into their own special section. And everyone's like, but that's just a book ban. That's the same thing you tried to do before. And it was at that point that the community was like, okay, we need to start a petition. Like we need to get people to sign a petition to say this panel, because it got passed by the city council, that this panel should not exist. Like we do not want this panel banning certain books in the library. So then the next step they took was like, oh, we're going to privatize the library because we don't think it's being run effectively. Once again, the community's like, you can't do that. That's not okay. So we started another petition. And so funnily enough, both of those petitions were actually in front of the city council that this week when I got arrested. Like those were also on the agenda because the council is trying to figure out how they can ignore those petitions, despite the fact it's clear a large part of the community wants them to keep their hands off the library. And so when they came up with the plaque, it was just like, for me, it was kind of the last straw. It's just keep your hands off the library.
Well, okay. So one thing that I've said about Republicans over the last few years, especially over the last 8 or 9 years, they always overreach. When they get into positions of power, they always overreach. And then act surprised when everybody around them has their hair on fire. I mean, it sounds like there's a little bit of that going on here, but and you've mentioned a couple of times that these people got elected to the city council and then started just ignoring their constituency, the citizens. I mean, is it starting to sink in for the members of the city council a little bit, or are they still just oblivious to everything?
Oh no, it's not that they're oblivious, it's that they don't care. They don't care about what happens to the community in Huntington Beach because they view their jobs as city council members not as a job to help the community, but as a way to springboard themselves to a higher position in Trump's orbit. And we actually just saw that happen where our previous city attorney, Michael Gates, wasted hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars on unwinnable cases, trying to keep high density housing from being built in the city, which is mandated by the state of California because, people need a place to live. They need affordable rent. And so he's just wasting tons and tons of money on this. And sure enough, he left to go take a job in the Trump administration. And that's what all of these city council members want. They want the national attention because they want to move up in Trump world. And so I need more members of the Huntington Beach community, especially those who voted for them, to realize you don't matter to these people. You're just pawns to them. Like you're just pieces for them to move around.
So I want to shift gears a little bit into a couple of different areas, but before I do that, just with these MAGA people, what is it what is wrong with these people?
It's lot.
I've just they seem so incredibly driven by having power and control over other people's lives.
Mm-hmm. And that's really what it boils down to. They want to tell other people what to do, and they don't want any pushback on it.
Which, in what universe would people ever go along with that?
Based on the number of wars that we've fought throughout human history, unfortunately, it's an idea that keeps popping up.
Yeah. And so, and I mean, I've lived in San Francisco for the last 23 years, so I've never had to interact with MAGA supporters on a daily basis in person. I joke with my friends.
That's because they're all at the tech companies.
Well, now, yeah.
Right?
It's like I used to joke with my friends that the only times that I ever had to interact with Trump supporters was when I would head into the Central Valley to go buy ammunition.
Yep.
But even in we don't really have those people here that we have to interact with. Nobody in San Francisco is wearing a MAGA hat. It just doesn't happen.
Right.
Yeah. But like zooming out a little bit, it's because I'm still to this day trying to understand. Well, is it just the racism, the misogyny, the bigotry, the homophobia? Because the pleas of economic anxiety don't seem to be genuine or honest. Mm-hmm. And, you combine that with all of this white Christian nationalism that's going on. And I'm just wondering what these MAGA people think is the actual end game, what they think they can make America look like.
Yes. So actually, a couple of the people behind that are Peter Thiel and Curtis Yarvin. And they have this idea of kind of like the dark enlightenment, where essentially they're going to remold the country in their image, where it's a like techno-fascist utopia, and only the brightest and smartest and most fit will survive. And somehow that also includes them. And it's, it's this really nihilistic, self-destructive viewpoint that it regards other people not as people, but as things. And I don't know if you've ever read Terry Pratchett, but like he's a fantastic British author. Unfortunately, he's passed away, but he wrote the Discworld series. And one of the things that he wrote that always stuck with me is that, evil begins with thinking of people as things. And like it doesn't matter what you're trying to do. If you start thinking of people as things, you're going down the path of evil.
One of the other things that was so disturbing to me, I think it culminated in the last election cycle, but clearly is something that's been going on for years and years, is the diverging paths between young men and young women in the United States. And speaking a little bit before I hit the record button, just to lay some foundation. So gaming is something that's important to you. You're part of the gaming community, correct?
Yeah. I've been a video gamer and nerd my entire life. Like I grew up, my very first gaming system was the original Nintendo Entertainment System. And like, I played Duck Hunt, first Mario Brothers, and Final Fantasy 1 just got me absolutely hooked. Like, JRPGs were my jam for a long time. And like, I love video games because they're like books, but in a different way. And like, some of them are short stories, some of them are quick poems, some of them are long, sprawling epics, but it's art and imagination. And it's also a lot of fun, right? Like video games are a lot of fun. And, at least for me and for a lot of other people, right?
Yeah.
But for a long time, video games were also considered this like niche hobby that only sweaty basement nerds enjoyed. And, we finally started moving past that in, I think around like 2010, 2011, somewhere around there, where it's like video games started becoming more and more and more mainstream. And now they're very mainstream. Like it's, the nerd culture has won. Like it's very hard to not find something that is not nerd culture. And so like I'm a big video gamer. I'm not like Elon. I don't pay people to play my games.
So did anybody really believe that he was the top player on that game?
No one who knew. So I actually play Path of Exile. I played Diablo 4. It's like if you know the time that goes into playing the game and reaching that level, and you're like, wait a minute, you're running these multi-billion-dollar companies, and you're involved in a presidential campaign, and now you're involved in the government. It is physically impossible for you to have enough hours in the day in order to reach this level. And then when we do see you play on stream, you're fucking terrible. Like, you don't know how to play the game.
Well, so in part of the conversation that you and I were having before we started recording, and I was talking about those diverging paths and this kind of alt-right pipeline to young men through, social media and through gaming. And you mentioned Gamergate and basically said that's kind of where this stuff started. Yeah. And you were part of the gaming community when all that stuff was going on. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So Gamergate was kind of the prototype for everything that we're seeing now. And it was billed as ethics in game journalism. What it was a movement to harass and drive out women, people of color, LGBTQ community members from the gaming industry and from the gaming environment in general, because the Gamergaters didn't like the idea that now everyone could play games. And they didn't like the idea that games could be something more than just like first person shooters or, big titty anime JRPGs. Like it was really depressing because, I actually wrote an article about it. You can find it on, I think it's still up on Medium. It's called Why Gamergaters Piss Me the Fuck Off. And basically in that article, I lay out all the ways that as nerds, we have won. like we have taken over popular culture. Like we are now the people that other people look to and be like, oh, that's cool. Like I want to do that too. And yet we still have these regressive elements that, much like MAGA, right? Much like this alt-right pipeline you're talking about, which absolutely exists, is that like you don't have to be hateful and bitter and spiteful because we're no longer the ones who get made fun of. Like you're no longer beat up and bullied at school for liking games. Like you can talk about it with your friends and like there's so like Victor Wembanyama, right? Like dude is reading books as an NBA star. And when I was growing up, like I'd be reading a book in the locker room. People like, you fucking nerd. Like what's wrong with you? And but nowadays that's not the case. So yeah, anyways, to get back to the original point, sorry, I go on tangents a lot.
No problem, man.
So Gamergate ended up being this whole harassment movement. It kind of sort of was the beginning of ideas like doxing and swatting and weaponizing the internet against people you didn't like because you couldn't be traced back. And so, yeah, like nowadays, those are just common terms, right? Like almost everyone knows what doxing is. Like almost everyone knows what swatting is. And
I know firsthand.
Oh yeah, I am sorry for that because that's I haven't been on the receiving end of swatting, but I have been on the receiving end of doxing, like having shit sent to my house, and like it sucks because
it is it's awful.
People are regarding you as a thing; they're not regarding you as a human being.
I mean, when I think about, because I read some stuff about, like if on social media, through gaming, through just like watching clips of games, clips of video games on YouTube, that's like sooner or later these algorithms, will detect these interest areas that typically apply to young men or teenage boys and start driving them to certain other kinds of content. And it was like, it was Andrew Tate. Then it was, just weightlifting stuff. And then, Jordan Peterson and like all this kind of right-wing stuff that would just send young men down these rabbit holes.
Now it's Joe Rogan, by the way.
And Joe Rogan. Yeah. And, it just, You know, because I see differences of men and women interacting with each other, and it's like when people on the right insult me, they just, you know, their only insult is to tell me that I'm gay, even though I'm not gay. They just make
Right.
some gay insult.
Yeah.
But when men or young men insult women on the internet in their comments or things like that, it's murder threats, it's rape threats, it's incredibly misogynistic stuff. And just statistically, you know, Gen Z, I think Gen Z, like young men, young women in their late teens into their 20s, there's just this chasm forming between them of
Right.
education, of accomplishment, of independence. And young men seem to be falling really far behind while bringing along with them racism, misogyny, bigotry. None of this is my fault. It's the fault of immigrants and trans people and all of this stuff. And I mean, do you see any of that stuff in the gaming community or feeding this stuff to young people?
Yeah, no, I absolutely see it in the gaming community, and I think a really big part of it is the fact that video games allow you to be the main character, right? Like there's a reason on the alt right and in the right wing calling someone an NPC is a slur, right? Like I mean, you've seen Elon use it, like you see a ton of people use it, and again, it's treating someone as a thing. Like you're a non-player character, you're not something that matters, and what playing games does is it allows you to be the one in control. And for a lot of these kids, a lot of these young men, they're not in control of a lot of factors in their life, you know, whether it be due to like a bad household at home, maybe they're not doing well in school, maybe they just don't have good relationships with other people. In video games, they can control things. And then once you start going down the algorithm rabbit hole, right, where like, oh, well, you know, here's how you control other things, right? Here's how you control, you know, people. Here's how you control women. And they just keep going further and further into the idea that the people around them are objects to be used instead of people with their own desires and wants. And we have to find a way to reach those people and help them understand that just because things are bad for you, like, yes, it's a failure on our system that we've let it get to that point for you, but you can't take it out on other people. We have to work together to fix things for you, just like we have to work together to fix things for everyone else. Because like if we don't, there's just going to be more and more young men following that path. I mean, it's a radicalization path, and it's very similar to when you look in like war-torn countries or, you know, countries experiencing extreme poverty. You have young men that have no hope for the future, right? They don't see a path forward for them, and so then they start lashing out, or they start falling under the sway of a charismatic individual who promises to make things better for them, to make America great again. But he doesn't have their interests in mind. He's just using them to make himself more powerful.
Yeah. I mean, you know, and like incel culture seems to be a very negative component of all of that as well.
Right.
And again, it's like I see so many videos from young women, especially on TikTok, where they're basically like, you guys can get dates. All you have to do is, you know, work on yourselves a little bit,
right?
Instead of
all you got to do is
lashing
try.
out. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, and it's okay to fail. I think that's another thing that a lot of young men need to understand, is that it is okay to fail. It's not going to feel very good because no one likes failing, but that's how you learn, and that's how you get better as a person. And if you fail at asking one girl out, then, you know, learn from it. Like, just maybe she wasn't interested in you. Maybe she just wasn't your type. That doesn't mean every woman isn't your type. It just means you need to find the person who is your type, and that's going to require some effort on your part. But they're out there. Like, there's someone out there for everyone. And if you don't want anyone, that's fine too. Like, you can be asexual and not be an asshole.
Yeah, it's just it's worrisome. It's worrisome to me that, you know, we could have basically an entire generation of young men right now who are idolizing like Joe Rogan and Elon Musk, and they're seeing what Elon's doing, and they just think it's cool.
Yeah, and it's not cool. Like destroying democracy is not cool. Let me just put that out there. Like there's no achievement for that.
I mean, so all right. I remember where I was and what I was doing, on election night when the election was called for Trump, and just, realizing what was coming. And one of the things I can't remember, I read and watched one of your interviews this week. One I think was with a guy named Dave Zirin.
Dave's
yesterday.
great.
Yeah, that was a great interview. And that's available on YouTube. I'll have my brother put that in the show notes if you guys want to watch it. One point that I think you made that I think is really important is, for straight white guys to be going out and doing a lot of this activism on behalf of marginalized communities.
Yeah, that's super important because we're privileged enough to be able to be arrested by police, and we won't be treated as poorly as someone who is gay, someone who is black, someone who is transgender, right? Like we're also one of the ones to blame for Donald Trump. Like Donald Trump is a white person problem. Let's not
Absolutely.
get it twisted. So as white people, we need to clean up our mess. Like we got to get out the cleaning supplies. We got to put in the work, and we have to fix the problem that we caused. Because if we don't, it's just going to keep getting worse and worse and worse.
So, you have also this week expressed, and I share this, a certain level of dissatisfaction with our current crop of elected Democrats.
I am quite displeased with them.
Yeah. I mean, I was on TikTok last night, Friday night, was watching, flipping through some people's lives, and watching some videos that people were putting up. And I don't remember if it was in New York or Philadelphia, but there were Democrats protesting Hakeem Jeffries because he's on a book tour right now. And I read that and I was just gobsmacked. They just, so many of them seem to be like, okay, this is just another Republican president, as though that's the only difference that we're dealing with.
Like, and then let me take a moment to point out that, it's not just Hakeem Jeffries, it's almost all of them. Like my representatives, Adam Schiff and Alex Padilla, like, why are you giving unanimous consent to put these confirmations forward? Why are you not wasting as much time as possible on these votes? The Republicans are going to vote for them anyways. There is no bipartisanship that's going to happen. Waste their time and force them to earn it. Because guess what?
Yeah.
That's what Mitch McConnell did, and he kicked your ass with it.
Every time, man.
Yeah, every learn
time
from the strategy that worked and use it.
And we've got Chuck Schumer in the Senate. Yay!
Yeah, and that just goes to show another huge problem with the current Democratic Party is that one of the things the Republicans have done, even though Trump's the one in office, one things that Republicans have absolutely kicked the Democrats' ass on is they have shifted to a younger party. Like they have really, really gone after younger people to become elected officials. Whereas the Democrats are just, Nancy Pelosi is still part of in charge of determining who's in charge in the Democratic Party. Like you said, Chuck Schumer is the Senate minority leader. It's like, guys, you had your turn. Like what you didn't work. Let's turn it over to a new generation.
I was so incredibly disheartened, but I think it's so emblematic of the point that you're making right now when I read about Nancy Pelosi, who had fallen and broken her hip while in Europe, had to get a hip replacement, was in a hospital bed in Luxembourg recovering from that surgery, lobbying other Democrats in Congress to prevent Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to become the ranking Democrat on the Oversight Committee because
Right.
another guy, I think is Jerry.
He's like 85 or 86 or something like that. Like,
Well, he's like late 70s and he's battling throat cancer.
right. Yeah.
And I'm like,
But it was his
okay,
turn.
But, well, because I think one thing that is so completely lost on those senior Democrats is, you know, people like AOC and people like Jasmine Crockett. It's like they get a lot of media attention just by being who they are, but they know what to do with it when they get it.
Right.
They know how to hold people's attention.
Like they're out there in the streets. They're out there talking to people. Like they're out there saying, here's what's wrong. Here's what we need to do. And meanwhile, the old guard is just like, well, you know, presidents come and go, but God remains eternal. It's like, how the fuck does that help us right now? Like, you know what would help us right now is if you guys started disrupting these proceedings and getting carried out, because I know that it's a very slim majority. I know that, yeah, if a couple Republicans flip sides, you might be able to stop some stuff. But guess what? That's not going to happen because we have a king. It doesn't matter. He's going to force them to vote the way he wants them to vote. And none of them are defecting because none of them have a spine and they don't care about their oaths to the Constitution.
You know, I mean, I think as we've seen recently, you know, in some of these Trump voters who are now losing their farms because grants and loans have been canceled, you know, Trump voters who are now regretting their vote only because it's starting to affect them personally.
Right.
You know, I think when our new FBI director and Kash Patel and our new Attorney General Pam Bondi, you know, when they start arresting Democrats on the floor of the House and the floor of the Senate, then maybe there will be a greater sense of urgency.
Right. I think at that point it's going to be too late. It's because now you're not being arrested for protesting something and showing what they're going to do. Now they're just exercising the power that you willingly gave them.
Yeah. And so I think, along those lines, I saw a quote from you. It was at the end. So I think it was at the end of the 2013 season that you were released by the Vikings.
Into the 2012 season, going into the 2013 season. Yeah.
And so I went back and found, I read this years ago when it first came out, but I went and dug it out again. An article that you had written for Deadspin entitled, "I was an NFL player until I got fired by two cowards and a bigot."
Yep.
First of all, I love the title of that article.
Thank you. Yeah, that was
it leaves no room for misinterpretation.
Yep. That's something I actually learned from the editor at Deadspin who made my first article go viral, Tommy Craggs. Great dude. Like he sacrificed a lot to try to keep Deadspin alive. And so my first article that went viral, "They won't magically turn you into a lustful cock monster." So that was the title of the article, right? When I submitted it to Tommy, it had no title because I didn't know what to title it. So he's the one who chose that as the title, and it was perfect. Like it's
fantastic, man.
And so I learned from that. I'm like, okay, if I want this one, you know, people to read it, well, I got to have a title that really kind of just lays out what it's about. So that was the title.
So you closed out that article. I'm going to read this quote and then I'm going to ask you a question. "Never be afraid to do what's right. If no one ever says anything, nothing ever changes." And, you know, the last couple, 3-4 years that you were in the NFL, I mean, your LGBTQ activism was very strong, very prominent, and caused you problems in your life from the NFL, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's why I lost my job. Like,
and so, I mean, what is the state of that kind of activism in the NFL today among players?
Guys have causes, but there's really haven't been any big ones since Colin Kaepernick, because unfortunately, I think a lot of guys saw what happened to Colin Kaepernick and they're like, if they can do that to a quarterback, then like really no
Yeah.
one's safe except like, say, you know, Patrick Mahomes or Travis Kelce. Like you'd have to be, you know, legit the superstar of your team that like everyone knows. Cause I mean, the accusation people always try to levy against Colin Kaepernick is that like, oh, he was just a mid-tier quarterback. You know, he really wasn't that great. And fine, if you believe that, that's fine. I personally don't think the stats back that up. I don't think his field on the play backs that up, but that's fine. If you want to believe that, that's fine. Yeah. Colin Kaepernick, even as a mid-tier quarterback, was still good enough to hold one of the 32 jobs in the NFL. And the fact that
as a starter,
right, as a starter. And if he wasn't given a chance to earn that job again after he started kneeling, that tells you something's wrong. That tells you that the league blackballed him because of his stances. Yeah. Because I'm sorry, if you're a team and you're giving Tim Tebow a workout and you're not giving Colin Kaepernick a workout, you better fire your scouting department because they are not good at their jobs.
Man. What do you think the next few months are going to be for this country? Where do you think we're heading?
That is a very scary question because I honestly do not know. Because I know what can keep happening, and it is very frightening because we are matching almost beat for beat what happened in Nazi Germany in the 1930s between when Hitler was elected and when Hitler dissolved the government and declared himself the supreme leader. And I'm a history and poli-sci major. Those were my degrees from UCLA. So like this isn't just me being like, oh, you know, I read this in a book somewhere. It's like, no, I legit read this in a book somewhere in a bunch of other books like this. And there's a whole bunch of other historians who are saying the same thing. And I don't know how much of your audience like cares about history or poli-sci, but usually when a bunch of historians are warning you about something, you need to pay attention.
Yes.
Because there's a reason they're doing it.
Yes. Yeah, and they are. I mean, I think it took Hitler, 53 days?
Yeah, it was somewhere around there. It was the governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker. He actually did a really good job laying out like point by point. Like this is how Hitler worked. This is what's happening here. That was a great speech. Yeah, no, it was fantastic. So I'm hoping we do not continue to follow that path beat for beat. But in order for us to diverge from that, a fork in the road, if you will, we need to have people willing to stand up and to commit acts of civil disobedience. And we need, most of all, for our elected officials to be doing that because they are the ones who are supposed to lead us. It's not supposed to be up to me. It's not supposed to be up to the person working a 9-to-5 job. It's supposed to be the people in the halls of power who recognize that something has gone wrong and they're going to show us the way forward. We need to have people willing to stand up and to commit acts of civil disobedience. And we need, most of all, for our elected officials to be doing that because they are the ones who are supposed to lead us. It's not supposed to be up to me. It's not supposed to be up to the person working a 9-to-5 job. It's supposed to be the people in the halls of power who recognize that something has gone wrong and they're going to show us the way forward.
Yeah. And to your earlier point, I mean, for me personally, that's one of the reasons why it was so incredibly demoralizing when I was seeing Democrats in the Senate vote for Donald Trump's cabinet nominees.
God, that's like, talk about an abdication of duty. How could you ever vote for one of his cabinet picks? I mean, like not just due to the fact that they're supremely unqualified for their jobs. Like he told you what he's going to do.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much again, Chris, for taking the time and for joining me tonight. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me on. It is really, really important that we talk about this. And just to reiterate, it is also really, really important for us as Americans to understand that this is a fight for America. This isn't a right versus left thing anymore. And we have to get both the left and the right and the people who aren't engaged to understand that and to become engaged because it's going to take all of us to stop this.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. All right. Thank you again so much for joining me. You are obviously welcome back anytime.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, yeah. I might take you up on it if I'm not in a camp.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, maybe we're both in California. Maybe we'll both end up in the same camp.
Right? Yeah, we'll be buddies.
All right. Thanks again, Chris. All right. Good night, everybody. We'll see you guys next time.